Year 2001, high crest of the Himalayas. You open your eyes as a Yeti, on a ledge of killing wind and white horizon, where a human lung would fold in minutes, and your first breath does not choke or panic. It feeds. Your coat is already thick, matte, and ridged like frozen pelt armor. Your hands are plates of bone and tendon built to crush ice. Your chest is deep and cavernous with lungs bred for air that would black out climbers. Your step lands without sound, not because you try, but because your frame grew for snow that punishes the heavy-footed. The first sound you ever hear is not a lullaby, but the static shriek of wind shearing stone and ice, and your body does not tense. You exist correctly in a place that kills everything else. Down in the low paths, humans crawl rope to rope in prayer to survive a mountain that answers them with frostbite and aneurysms, while you stand at birth already above their ceiling. They train with bottled oxygen and mirrored goggles to attempt what you do idly by being alive. While they argue gear, hypoxia, calorie ration, you lie on raw ice with a pulse that does not flicker. You will not grow into this mountain. You begin as its apex. The same cliff that breaks their teams into obituaries is your nursery floor. The same cold that steals their fingers is your baseline climate. You are not introduced to altitude. You are altitude with muscles. And before you even learn your own stride, you will be overheard in their fear speech carried by radios and rescue logs as they invent names and myths to soften the humiliation of failing on land you treat as hallway. Then, the first scent of them reaches you. A hot mineral stink of nylon, metal and sweat that does not belong to this air. And when you move downslope, you find a frozen flag mast cracked by wind. A rope line half buried a steel carabiner fused in ice. Mute relics of a push that died mid-mountain. You inspect their hardware the way a wolf inspects the jawbone of a deer. It did not need to kill, not curious but aware. Above that ridge, the air carries a broken radio voice calling breathing numbers and prayer codes, while the caller already shivers toward collapse. And from the same ridge, you can see tents glowing like small sores in the snow as teams buckle under a sky you treat as floor, unaware that they are already being watched by the thing they report as unseen. You grow into motion that ignores gravity. Air thins and burns the lungs of men, but your body drinks it like clear water. Where their veins tighten, yours open wider. Snow shifts under human boots like sand, yet under you it hardens as if recognizing its master. You move upright, silent, faster than the sound of your own weight. When a storm locks climbers in their tents, you travel through it like a swimmer through a warm current, following trails only you can sense. Your breath leaves no mist, your shadow disappears against the pale slopes, and your pulse stays steady while others gasp for oxygen with cracked lips. You hunt without chase or sound, your bulk dissolving into the terrain. A mountain hare freezes mid-step, its ears twitch once, and you strike. The snow covers what's left before the wind even changes. Humans carry canisters of oxygen, their faces hidden behind masks and goggles, spending hours just to reach what you cross in minutes. To them, every movement demands calculation and prayer. To you, the same motion is instinct, a rhythm older than their maps. They think altitude is punishment. You call it home. Above the highest camp where even helicopters stutter and fall back, you keep running, climbing, leaping from ridge to ridge, a blur that no lens can capture. Below, radios crackle with static as climbers whisper about a shape seen through the fog. Something tall, fast, white. They argue if it was snow shifting or a shadow, or maybe the Yeti. You pause for a second, hearing your name tremble through the wind, but the sound fades before it reaches you, and you continue upward across knife-edge ice, where a single misstep would send a human into a 1,000-meter drop. Your feet grip as if grown from that same stone, and you do not slow to think. Where a climber melts snow for water and waits 20 minutes for a swallow, you sink a hand into drift and eat it mid-stride without cooling your core. They sleep inside bags and foil to avoid death in the night. You sleep on naked ice and wake with no frostbite, no stiffness, no penalty. You cross serac fields that collapse under ropes and detonators without ever triggering a fracture, because your weight spreads with perfect geometry. You do not measure distance in hours like they do, or in breaths like they do, but in ridges cleared and valleys owned. When the clouds tear for a moment, you see a caravan of dots far below moving with desperation and caution. Trackers scanning ridges, lenses pointed high, convinced they are close. They are not close. They are measuring their hunt in linear distance when the truth is vertical. You are above their ceiling by default before the chase even begins. You do not fear humans. They fear the idea of you. Fear is the only version of you that most of them will ever meet. Before they see a print in the snow or a shadow on a ridge, they speak your name with their pulse already rising, because the idea of a Yeti travels faster than a rope team. Expedition leaders use you as a lever to shut down reckless climbers. Sherpas invoke you in short-cutting sentences that end arguments without debate. When an ascent fails, when a team turns back or someone cracks under altitude, the word Yeti is deployed like insurance for the ego. You are the alibi that keeps dignity intact. You become the story that explains away weakness. A team quits early, and instead of saying they were undertrained or scared, they say they heard something too heavy to be a man. You are a face-saving mechanism baked into the culture of the mountain. Around firelight in high camps, they narrate you the way sailors once narrated sea monsters, not to be accurate but to control behaviour. In cities, you are flattened into plush toys and cartoon villains in films from the 90s and 2000s, with rounded edges and goofy smiles, so that children can sleep while the real version of you is the reason experienced Sherpas return to villages with a look that ends questions. Men who would admit hypothermia or a broken rib will not admit panic, so they outsource it to you. Your name is a pressure valve. When a foreign climber loses nerve and refuses to continue, he will blame weather, gear, or Yeti long before he blames himself. You are a narrative technology that keeps pride from collapsing in public, and none of this requires you to be seen. You profit by staying invisible because myth is stronger than proof. A filmed animal can be categorized, an unfilmed one can rule by rumor. On one approach, a porter steps onto a shelf of wind-scoured snow and sees your track still crisp and unblown. The print is longer than his forearm and sinks deeper than the weight of 2 men. He calls the others. Nobody advances. They stare as if the track itself were a voice. Radios wake, camp chatter spikes. Plans are rewritten around a footprint. Warm sleeping bags are zipped early. A segment of the route is abandoned without contest. That single trace of your passing does more work than a roar or an ambush. They freeze not because you stand there, but because you could. The outline of your existence is enough to bend human behaviour at distance. You do not have to enter their tents to rearrange their minds. The mountain is the stage, rumour is the weapon, and you control both without showing your face. Expeditions move under you for weeks, thinking they are the hunters, while you occupy the tier above their maps and watch their red tents pulse weakly in the dark, like fevers trapped in canvas. You track their ascent from cornices and shadow bowls and ridges they cannot enter, because the air there tears their lungs while your chest stays calm. You hear them debate on radios about where you might be while they point binoculars at a valley that never carried your weight even once, because they are literally turned the wrong way and too low. One group huddles inside a basalt throat of a cave, believing they found a blind where they can wait you out, and you sit across the gorge on a black knuckle of stone for 2 nights, and watch their fire shrink and die as the cold draws the breath out of their throats, and the leader wakes to a man already stiff and silent beside him. They will write later that the mountain took him, but you know the mountain is only lethal to what does not belong here, and what belongs here is you. Another team plants motion cameras on a saddle, but they mount, them facing into windscour, instead of into the chute where you actually pass. So the footage returns blank, and the blankness will be interpreted as proof that you are fable, when the truth is that they instrumented the wrong dimension. You learn quickly that being a myth is stronger than being a body in their frame, because myth blocks the budget to kill you while a photographed body would invite rifles and grants. Invisibility pays more than presence. You become a shielded apex by staying narrative, not specimen. The cold does the compliance work for you by pushing them into retreat long before they intersect your stride. And then you decide to test the line between rumour and sight, not by being caught, but by letting one pair of eyes register you from impossible range across a blue notch at dawn, just a vertical mass too large and too steady to be ice. And the man drops his glove and screams for the others to turn, but by the time they swivel, you are gone. Not lost, gone, and the fracture inside his voice will travel farther than any photograph they might have taken if you had stayed still 1 second longer. They escalate to drones, orbital passes, thermal nets, synthetic aperture maps, and forensic footprints of melt signature. And you watch the era of proof try to break the era of legend, but the category does not collapse because you choose what is seen and what is denied. A myth cannot be killed until it is demoted into specimen, and you never permit containment. You never permit capture. You never permit the conversion from story into skull. That is why it rocks to be a Yeti, not because you crush ice or breathe thin air or outrun men on rope, but because you own the narrative that governs their courage. You are the clause that repairs their pride when they fail, and the threat that disciplines them before they try. They build tech because they cannot build belonging. They seek you because they cannot admit that some things outrank them in silence. Every age that rises arrives promising to finally expose you. Each one leaves with nothing but new language to rename the same absence. Your dominance is not a scene of violence, but a veto over being known, the authority to remain above evidence, the power to turn their most advanced instruments into blank tape. They will keep returning with better steel and better glass and better code, and still exit with another legend instead of a body, because the last move is yours, not theirs. A creature that can be catalogued can be controlled. A creature that cannot be catalogued can rule from outside the frame. The mountain gives you cover, the climate gives you leverage, but what seals the hierarchy is not altitude, it is epistemology. You are the upper boundary on what a human is allowed to confirm. You do not disappear, you disallow capture, and by disallowing capture you lock them forever below you inside the only prison that outlives ice and wind. Uncertainty.